Welcome to Pera's Playbook. This is your host, Alex Pera. Let's open up our playbook and see who our guest is. Please enjoy. Welcome to episode 152 of Pera's Playbook. Today I'm joined by Imboden. He's a drummer who was with Kenny Loggins, Chicago, and he's also worked with Neil Diamond, Firefall, Richard Marx, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. The list goes on and on, but he's the first of a few musical guests we'll have on the podcast here in the coming week. So happy to have Tris with us here. And how's it going?
Going great, Alex. Thank you. How about
Yeah.
yourself?
Oh, I'm doing well. It's a beautiful day here. I'm in Michigan, and our spring is slowly creeping in. But today I got out of work. It was 58 degrees. The sun was shining, and the snow was melting. So it's all good.
Oh, that's great. I love spring.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, after after winter, it feels so nice to see the sun again, and you just kind of feel refreshed. And yeah, it's great.
Definitely. Yeah. And that's across the board. It doesn't matter where you are. I mean,
Right.
what latitude or,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to diving into your career, just talking some music. I've always been a big music guy, like all kinds of music. And growing up, Chicago was one of my favorite bands. They still would be. And Kenny Loggins has some great stuff, and all the people you work with. So I'm just I like talking music. So I've been looking forward to just kind of hash out kind of your career and then just talk some tunes.
Great. Great, man. Well, I'm more than happy to do that. Yeah, it'd be
So
fun.
I reading online, and I always got to check because sometimes the stuff you find online isn't always completely factual. But
Right.
it said that you were primarily self-taught at a young age, and your interest kind of started with going to a parade and seeing a marching band.
Yeah, exactly. My dad, when I was really young, about 5 or 6 years old, I guess, had taken me to a parade, and I'll never forget the drum section going by, and it was just, God, it was more than I could take at that tender age. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I was so moved. So
Yeah.
anyway, I knew pretty much then that I was going to do that. So
Did
yeah.
you go home and say, Dad, can you buy me a drum set?
Well, it wasn't quite like that. Yeah, no, it was. My folks didn't have a lot of money back then, and so I pretty much drove them crazy with taking wooden spoons and turning them around and beating on pots and pans in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You played trumpet in the school band until there was an opening in the percussion section.
Yes, exactly. Because everybody wanted to play drums, and
Yeah.
yeah, myself included. And I knew all the guys in the drum section, and they were kind of rooting for me to play drums because they knew, I mean, I kind of on my own learned a few things, and they knew I could play a little bit, so they were lobbying on my behalf
Yeah.
to the band director. And but I actually was a pretty good, not a bad trumpet player in the first year that I started playing. I made it to second chair. I just love music so much, and
Yeah.
it's come fairly easy to me, easily. Maybe more so than to some people. And
Yeah.
so anyway, but I was so grateful and excited when the band director saw fit to stick me in the drum section.
Yeah. But you always you could have filled in Chicago if they needed an extra horn guy too, hey?
All right. Yeah, that's a little out of my league. I didn't really, I haven't really played since I got in the drum section all the way back in junior high school. So, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Once you got in, you never looked back, eh?
yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So who are your favorite artists growing up? Kind of, some of your influences and bands or musicians you just really liked.
Oh my God. Well, I'm kind of all over the map, Alex. I love so many different styles of music, and uh, so many great drummers and musicians in general have influenced me over the many years I've been at it. And but I growing up, my folks were also very eclectic in their tastes. So I was exposed to everything from classical music to big band jazz to Dave Brubeck and the great Joe Morello on drums, and then Gene Krupa and all these Buddy Rich and all those amazing drummers and all that great big band jazz uh, of the 40s that they were into. Uh, and then, I had my ear glued to the radio from the time I had one, which was at a, also a very early age. Gratefully, I had from the time I was 5 or 6 again. And I was listening primarily to rock and roll, but I listened to all kinds of any kind of music really. But all the early rock and roll, gee, you're so young that it's impossible for you to remember, some of these records. But boy, they were really instrumental, no pun intended, in my development.
Yeah,
Everything from all the early well, Elvis and my God, the Everly Brothers and gee, Chuck Berry and Little Richard and all of those people, those early artists. um, and then of course as time went on, I was heavily influenced by then the whole English invasion and all of that,
yeah,
with the Beatles and the Yardbirds and the Animals and the, you know, on and on. And I was playing in bands. Well, by the time I was in high school, I didn't follow through studying music through high school because I was already in bands that were making money. I was playing at the high school dances and making money,
yeah,
playing rock and roll. So it was like I didn't really want to be in a marching band or orchestra anymore. And, in
yeah.
a lot of ways, I kind of regret that, although it did work out for me. So,
Yeah, right. Yeah, you can think about what it would have been like if you did it different, but like you said, it worked out just fine for you. And
yeah,
yeah, at a young age too. I mean, what do you want more? When you're a drummer, you want to be playing in a rock band, playing tunes, making money. I mean, at a young kid too. I mean, money is, it's
yeah,
important, right? You gotta be
yeah,
spending money and
absolutely. And it
take the
never
girls
stops
out
for
for a
me.
date.
Yeah, that's right. And there was another perk, and that was that the girls seemed to like guys that played in bands a lot too. So that was
Yeah.
very attractive to me.
Right. Yeah, that's I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Dazed and Confused, but there's a line in the movie where they're talking about playing football. One guy doesn't want to play football and he said like, why do we play football? And I think the other guy says something about, like for the girls. And he's like, well, we couldn't we just start a band or something? Like if we wanted girls, if that was the only reason we're playing football, can't we just start a band? Or, something
Yeah,
like that.
exactly. Not get beat so much, right?
Oh, I know I butchered that. It was along those lines. Yeah. No, all the artists you named
I'm
are great.
losing your sound, your voice a
Oh,
little. It sounds muted.
can you still hear me or?
Now I can, yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay. All right. Um, all that stuff you mentioned, all those artists, just
Huh?
great stuff, and I personally have a very diverse music taste too. Kind of I guess I go in moods, maybe a month I'm really into heavy metal and then I'm really into classical and then I'm really, kind of month by month. But I know
Yeah.
some people, they're only country. That's all they listen to is country
Oh,
music or only rock or only pop. And they're very just
oh, right.
narrowed in on, one thing. And I can't imagine not listening to everything.
Yeah, yeah, I feel the same. I'm uh, really grateful that I've been able to work with a lot of wonderful and heroes of mine in the jazz world as well, because oftentimes in the music business, you get stereotyped, kind of like, oh, okay, well he's a good rock and roll player, or oh, he's a jazz guy. Well, I've kind of gotten to blur the lines a little.
Yeah.
I've worked with everybody from Al Jarreau to Bob James, David Sanborn, Stanley Clark. I mean, incredible jazz musicians, as well as all the rock and roll I've gotten to, and pop I've been a part of. So I've been really blessed in that way, you know. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, let's dive into some of your experiences. We'll start with Kenny Loggins. How did you get the role as his drummer? Let's start there.
Okay, well, gee, I was working with an English artist that I'd actually recorded a couple of albums with, named Ian Matthews, and we were getting ready to go on the road to promote his second album that I had recorded. He'd done numerous albums before that, but uh, I'd heard about these auditions for the Kenny Loggins band, or Kenny was putting a band together, and that he had this incredible new album that was about to come out. So anyway, I kind of half-heartedly went to audition, because I already had a gig with Ian Matthews, and he was a really good friend of mine as well. And uh, and I really thought, because I knew there were so many drummers auditioning, there was over 100 something drummers, and a lot of whom were heroes of mine. I mean, named drummers. So I thought pretty much I had a deer fart in a windstorm's chance of getting it, getting called back. But I thought, what the hell? I'll just go and audition anyway. Well, turns out, yeah, they really liked me, and they kept calling me back. And it was getting closer and closer to the time that, I was going to have to go on the road with Ian Matthews. And I was going, geez, what am I going to tell Ian? I mean, I don't want to do that to him if I did get that gig with Kenny Loggins. And then, sure enough, I get a phone call from Kenny Loggins, and he said, how'd you like to join a rock and roll band? And I said, oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, I'm on it. And so, uh, anyway, so from there, that was really a huge break for me. Um, Prior to that, I'd been in a band that had, I had quite a bit of recording experience because of a band that I was asked to join right out of high school that already had a record deal, and that band was Honk, Honk. And our claim to fame was, yeah, even though we weren't a surf band or anything, we did do a soundtrack for a surf movie that went nuts. It was like, all over the world, actually. In fact, it's still considered to be on par with, almost with Endless Summer, and so we had a number one record in Hawaii from that, and which was, pretty cool.
Yeah,
So, and it turns out Kenny Loggins back when it was Loggins and Messina, we ended up opening for Kenny Loggins, or Loggins and Messina, and also coincidentally Chicago and a number of big name acts. So,
yeah.
yeah, but anyway,
Uh,
it was the Kenny Loggins gig that really put me on the map, I think, because, geez, I mean, I started making hit records, and,
right. Yeah,
and
I mean he's such a legend in the music world. He's got so many songs that when you like think of the 80s, they're just iconic, quintessential 80s songs.
yeah,
And he's kind of like the soundtrack king. Caddyshack 1 and 2, Footloose, Over the Top, Top Gun, so many movies that he's done music for. And I know you did some for a few of those, like Footloose and Caddyshack and whatnot. And
yeah,
I mean,
I
that'd
know,
be
right?
pretty cool to be part of that, especially with those movies were such successes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Gee, Footloose alone, we did the title track, Footloose, and another song called "I'm Free" on
Yep,
that
heaven
album.
helps the man. Yeah.
But it actually has gone on to sell 9 million albums. In fact, there's one behind me right here was when it went 5 times platinum, or 5 million. But yeah, that was, in the mid '80s, or early '90s it did that, and then now it's up to 9 million. And yeah, I and then boy, it was great doing that tune for Caddyshack as well. Some
A little
movie
gopher.
just so hysterically funny, right? The song "I'm All Right," yeah, yeah, and gee, there's so many great. Kenny is such a brilliant songwriter, but I have to say, most of my favorite tunes that I had the privilege of being a part of, the or big records, big singles, were ones that he collaborated with Michael McDonald on. Like,
Yeah.
their first song they wrote together was "What a Fool Believes," which is like that blew up #1 all over the
Oh
world,
yeah.
and Song of the Year and won a Grammy and everything. And like Kenny says, they avoided each other after having done that. The first song they'd ever written together was that, and Song of the Year #1. So they postponed writing another one together because they were afraid. They didn't, how do you top that? And so they did finally get together, and they wrote a song called "This Is It," which I played on, and uh, and Michael sang backgrounds on. And I'm so proud of that song. And that tune, I have to say, really, I kind of solidified my position in the LA studio guy scene, I think, because Kenny is a real drum aficionado and a drum freak. And he really used to push me to kind of do things, you know, really creatively different than what you'd normally hear on a pop record. And so it was really great. So consequently, some of the, like that song in particular, sort of an unusual kind of drum part that caught a lot of people's ears. And so I started getting asked to record with all kinds of artists after that.
Yeah. And speaking of him collaborating, did you do the drums for "Don't Fight It" with Steve Perry?
You know what? Yes, but originally, as an experiment, that was the first song that they cut for the album High Adventure. And so I think they used another drummer with Neil Giraldo from Pat Benatar on guitar. And then this drummer, I think his name was Dennis Conway or something. I don't know him. And hadn't heard of him. And as an experiment, it was a producer, Brute Botnick's idea to kind of use some different players because prior to that, Kenny had used his band on pretty much everything and then added, Michael Jackson on background vocals or Michael Brecker on saxophone or something. Uh, but it was always this core group. So they did that song, but then so they got the basic track, but then they decided they didn't like the way the drums sounded. They liked what he played, so they wanted me to actually go back and double, like, I had to like really carefully figure out what he played and then double it with my drums. And then they mixed the two together.
Huh.
So if you look at that song on the album, High Adventure, it's the only song on there that says Tris Imboden percussion and then Dennis Conway drums. The rest is all me. And
Wow.
hit from that album, there was a big hit called Heart to Heart, which was another Michael McDonald Kenny Loggins collaboration that I'm real proud
Yeah.
of.
Yeah.
All
That's
me.
really that's really interesting. Do they do that often where they don't like it, they'll have somebody play, kind of cover it and,
That's the
doctor it up?
first time I've ever had to do that. First and only time, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, if usually if they don't like the sound of something, the sounds, but they like the playing, um, they'll just go back and do it again,
Yeah.
and zero in on the sound that they didn't like, and make it,
Right.
yeah, make it so they like it.
Yeah. Right. So, you said that kind of some of those songs helped you, get your name out there. You started collaborating with other people. And one of
Mhm.
those collaborations I wanted to touch on was Neil Diamond, because I love Neil Diamond. I mean, he's fantastic. He's one of the best. And everyone knows his hits, but I like diving into some of his other stuff. Like I think I have his his two disc greatest hits or whatever. And I mean, you could listen to everything on there, and it's so good. Most people probably only know Sweet Caroline and
Right.
Cracklin' Rosie, but I like Brooklyn Roads and Brother Love's Traveling Salvation Show and some of that other stuff. But what was it like to work with him?
Oh man. Well, it was great. It was David Foster producing um, Neil Diamond at that point, and I'd already done another. Well, prior to that, it was geez, what was the name? I've got it here, I think. Oh, what's it called? Something to the future. I forget what the title is anyway. So I've got a one that he gave me on the wall here.
Yeah.
But anyway, David Foster, I was sort of he was the great producer who produced Kenny and numerous other, and gone on to win 16 Grammys and produced everybody you can
Oh
mention.
yeah.
Yeah, over the years. Anyway, at that point in my career, I was in David's stable, kind of, but I got called to play this session that for another album of Neil Diamond's that I ended up playing on the title song, which is "The Best Years of Our Lives," and uh, and that one, that song was very successful as well. And at that session, even though I'd worked on another earlier album of his, I never met him, but on that session he was there, and he was the nicest guy and so unassuming and not like you would expect. He was just very humble, kind of quiet actually, and
Yeah.
it was a joy to meet him because I have to say, there's been not often, but on occasion, there have been artists I've met that I've loved their music, and I wish I hadn't met them, because
Yeah.
uh, they were difficult, kind of
Yeah.
to, and so anyway, but Neil was just a joy.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, he's just fantastic top to bottom. His music and his his songs are just they're great. It's hard not to like his music. And I mean, another guy that had so many iconic songs that were just sports stadiums, and Sweet Caroline comes on and everybody's singing it. I mean, just
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely, absolutely. He's a true piece of Americana, and not just American,
right.
Americana. I mean, worldwide too.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to see the Broadway show they have about him. I think that would be in his music. I think that would be really neat to see. They call it beautiful sound, a beautiful noise, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, I forget
Yeah,
what it's called too. I haven't seen it, but
yeah. No, I think that would be neat to see. Um, yeah, no, he's definitely wonderful. And you've worked with so many artists. I mean, we could talk about all of them and be here, all day because you've worked with so many on specific projects. And as a musician, I imagine, I mean, that's kind of what you want, right? To collaborate with other wonderful artists.
oh man, I mean, it's such an honor. And truth be told, Alex, I'll never. I don't know how it is that I got as fortunate and lucky as I've been, because I have so many friends and people over the years I've known that are such brilliant musicians, and in my mind anyway, absolutely smoke my talent and my abilities and my whatever, that never got any of the opportunities that I have had presented to me. So I don't take it for granted. I'm very, very grateful uh,
Yeah,
for it all. And not just that, I've gotten to travel the world many times over, all over the world, and play music, and get to see the sights and meet people, and experience things that I don't know how else, if I ever would have any other way. So Yeah,
Yeah.
really great.
Yeah, it really makes you appreciate your career and count your blessings and all that when you see that, because I mean that happens all the time in life. I feel like whether it's sports or music or jobs, where there might be somebody that it has more talent, but maybe they just weren't seen. They didn't have the opportunities. They didn't have the connections. Obviously, networking is so huge when it comes to a lot of this stuff that if you
Yes,
don't have, once you got into Kenny Loggins and you got to play on some of that stuff, people noticed you. So if you didn't have that big break, what would have happened?
I know it, I know. So, it was my turn, I guess. I don't know. It's always
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
And then you ended up spending 28 years with Chicago, another king in the music world. So how did you end up with Chicago? I know you did some work with Peter Cetera. Did he put in a good word for you, or was that all just separate?
No, I was separate. I worked with Peter much before I was asked to join Chicago, and it's not that they were really in touch with each other anymore anyway.
Yeah,
Uh, and I actually Bill Champlin, who of the band, whom I'd worked with on a lot with other artists and that, because he had done so much studio work in addition to being a member of Chicago. Um, it was actually uh, he that recommended me um, to the band. And I'll still remember getting the phone call from him, and it was perfect timing because I had just returned from Europe that year with Al Jarreau. I'd spent a lot of time in Europe, and Kenny Loggins, at that point, I was kind of dividing my time between Al Jarreau and Kenny Loggins. And, but I didn't have a tour. They weren't touring. So this particular summer, so Bill called and said, "How'd you like to play with the band?" And, I've said this in many interviews, so I don't want to repeat it. Well, I'll do it anyway. Uh, and I said, "Let me think about it. Yes." Because, I'd been a fan of Chicago. I'd seen them when I was 16 years old. Before they had really blown up, I'd gone to see this British band, Procol Harum, in Los Angeles. I was living in Sunset Beach at the time, so anyway, this completely unknown band was playing on a stage, not even the main stage, when I walked in, and I was just going, "Who are these guys? My God, man!" The three horn players and the drummer was on fire, and the lead guitar player was killing, and these great songs and great vocals, and I was going, "Man, this band might be one of the best I've ever seen." And nobody seemed to know who they were. I finally heard from somebody that they were called like Chicago Transit Authority or CTA or something, and they didn't even have a record out yet. They were fairly new in town and come to LA from Chicago, and so never in my wildest could I have imagined I'd be the drummer someday. It's like, how could that be? So
yeah. Yeah,
so
they've had so many wonderful songs in kind of different eras. The Chicago Transit Authority and those first few albums kind of have the similar sound, and then you go to the middle, Peter Cetera stuff, and that's got a sound. But then the later 18, 19, 21 with Jason
uh-huh.
has a different more 80s, late 80s pop vibe, and so they kind of have different chunks. And
Yeah.
you were there with Chicago 21, which
Uh-huh.
has some great tunes on them, some great ballads, which Chicago is obviously known for, these love romance ballads. Um, and I
Right.
might be in the minority, like I know my dad, he's big Peter Cetera Chicago more, but I
Uh-huh.
like the later stuff, the Jason 18, 19, 21. That's
Oh,
my
cool.
favorite. Those some of
Uh-huh.
those tunes.
Yeah, I have to say, once David Foster stepped in, he really was a huge shot in the arm for the band. Uh, because at the point that he did, right around 16, Chicago 16, you know, they were their popularity had declined some. They hadn't had a hit in a few albums, and in a way, they were kind of not real unified in their direction, I think. And that's not really it, I mean, it's just my opinion, but David really remedied that. And like so many of David Foster's productions, uh, they really have that Foster touch too. I mean,
Yeah.
which is he's really meticulous, but he's got a real sound that he has in his mind and he goes for. And and man, it just totally revived their obviously, hard to say I'm sorry and hard habit to break and you're the inspiration and band. But the band, of course, being a rock and roll band, they didn't want to be known as a ballad band solely as that, even though they had huge success with those power ballads. And so consequently, the record company wanted more of those, and as did the public,
Yeah.
and both Peter and Jason sang the crap out of them, Peter, of course, and Bill Champlin, and a few duets, and then Jason and Bill Champlin too together. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. They're one of those bands too where, I mean, you can listen to their whole catalog top to bottom. There's so much good stuff, and they kind of adapted too. And obviously you mentioned David Foster coming in and kind of giving them a shot in the arm, but if you look at the time period, I mean, the music changed with the time. Some bands don't do that, right? They stick to their sound no matter what happens, and then, like you said, sometimes you fall off. But if you look at those late 80s albums, I mean, they're so much different, and they really fit the time and the vibe. And obviously with David, that helps. And
Right.
I
Right.
think maybe I just like that sound more, because like Van Halen, I like Sammy Hagar Van Halen over, and you got the same
You
thing with
do.
them in some of those later albums where it's got that more synth vibe. And
Right. As opposed to Eddie and guitar, yeah. Oh,
yeah,
yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
yeah,
No, absolutely. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
You have to adapt, otherwise you won't survive in the music world.
That's true. Music's always like any art form is always, evolving and changing. It has to,
Yeah.
it becomes stale otherwise. So,
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's
yeah,
great to have a sound that you're kind of known for, and you can still do that. You can kind of have your core sound, but you got to experiment and try new things, and go with what's. And sometimes, I mean, nowadays you hear certain bands and they pull stuff from different. There was a, I can't remember what his name is. He's a current artist, but he gives me a like a '50s vibe with his music. I mean, that he's putting out. And it's really unique sounding. He released his album the last year or two, but it just gives such a '50s vibe.
wow.
It's really, I like it. It's a change of pace from what you hear on the radio today.
Yeah, I love that too when someone, comes up with something like that. And particularly tips their hat to that which came before,
Yeah,
I love that. I love that sense of tradition,
right. Because
Yeah,
none of these musicians would obviously be here without the foundation that was built for them before. So, like you said, when you tip your hat, it's a show of respect, and all that with it.
absolutely. Absolutely. We all stand on the shoulders of what's those that came before, Yeah,
Right.
I mean, it's evolution, Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I when I was in college, we needed different electives, and I took a couple music, history of rock, history of music, history of classical music, and we learned all about the roots of all the genres. And I thought the history of rock was great. I mean, we went back to the 30s and 40s and started there, and then built our way up through the decades, and the different genres and everything. I mean,
Oh,
when
that's
you really study it, it's amazing stuff you wouldn't notice just listening to the radio, of similarities and all that. It's really awesome.
yeah, yeah. No, that's so cool, man, that you being so young are just so attuned to that, man. I really like that, and I really
Yeah,
respect it. Yeah, that's great.
yeah. No, I love. I'm not gonna toot my horn and say I'm some unique music lover. But I know, like looking at my friends, they don't all appreciate classical music. But like my wife and I, sometimes you just feel in the mood. We put on classics of Beethoven, Mozart, or I'm big into film scores and
Uh-huh.
it's all wonderful stuff. People who say classical mooring is music is boring, they're not listening to classical music then, because it's surely not boring.
No, it's not in the least.
There's such a story that is told with each piece, and they're so powerful. I mean,
Oh man.
very upbeat and impressive too. I mean, just
Oh,
impressive with what they were doing with what they had at the time period.
absolutely. And so imaginative, man. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
good stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, when I was reading online, one of the reasons that you stepped away from Chicago is you want to spend more time with your family. Touring is busy and whatnot. I mean, you toured for so long with Kenny Loggins and different groups in Chicago. I mean, how draining is that? I mean, you're constantly on the go. You're doing shows night after night, and you're going all over the world. I mean, that has to just be incredibly draining.
Well, yeah, it is in a lot of ways, and it's also very trying on relationships. Too being away from home. It's like being deployed for decades. You're gone for such a good amount. I'll tell you, Alex, when I first joined Chicago, the band was touring on average about 6 months out of every year. And now that was okay, that was manageable. I could still kind of keep my presence as a session player in Los Angeles, and Hollywood and all of that going. And I always liked that because playing with other artists kind of keeps you fresh too. And
Yeah,
but as time went on, and as the music business sort of imploded in the record business specifically, recording became less and less viable as a source of income for songwriters, musicians, and bands and all. Chicago ramped up their touring, and so what was 6 months out of every year became then 8 months. And then by the time I left, the band was touring 8 to 10 months out of every year. And so anyway, man, being away from home, it's such a privilege, first of all, to get to do what we do. Uh, Something you love, you see the world, you get paid well, um, it's you get to hopefully make people happy. But at the same time, there's so many sacrifices, like being away from loved ones, and your families, and I completely missed my daughter's childhood, because I was just gone from almost the time she was born. And and so, it's a huge trade-off. And so finally, I met and married my current wife in 2018, and 2017 rather. And uh, by that time, I'd been on the road since, geez, 1972 or three or so thereabouts, uh, pretty much constantly or intermittently. But then once I joined Chicago, it just started really ramping up. And so also being a cancer survivor, okay, I'm now 16 years out from lung cancer. That really gave me a different perspective on my life. So,
mhm.
because once your mortality is like right in your grill, you can't help but see things differently. So, having met and married Mary, my wife, and not wanting to be away from her as much as I was with Chicago, And, um, being this new perspective, and uh, actually, I'm still amazed. I've made it this far, 16 years out from lung cancer. Uh, I went, maybe I ought to start and enjoying my life more and working less. So that's what made me step away. Uh, People thought I was crazy. And I understand why. I mean, it was such an honor to be asked to play with Chicago in the first place. But man, it's like I heard somebody say, you know what? There's more to life than showbiz. and, yeah, and I agree. There really is. And so uh anyway, I'm really enjoying my life now. And I still, my God, I'm still playing. Of course, I'll always play. I'm still recording with different artists, and I've got my own band and that we play on occasion. And yeah, so yeah, that's kind of how I feel about why and how, and the all the nuts and bolts of why I left the band. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, people can say crazy, but it's especially when you mentioned the cancer thing. Glad to see you're still doing well and you're feeling good. But like a
Hey.
major event like that, really, like you said, it changes your perspective. It's so easy to push family aside when you're working and whatnot. Even though family is the most important thing, what are we without our families? Um,
Absolutely.
and you see that happen a lot. You see professional athletes, maybe they have a serious injury and they step away from the game because they want to increase their longevity of life and to have a good life with their family.
Mhm.
So it's the same type of thing. You kind of got to look at what your priorities are, what's important to you, and I'd say that if you're happy with it, whatever you're doing, and it's because it's your life, then that's
Mhm.
what counts, right? People can look at you and say, "Oh, you're crazy stepping away from it," but
Mhm.
then maybe they've got their priorities are a little screwed up. If I think the family is so important at it, and if you can still play, but kind of do it on your own terms,
Yeah.
then that's what counts. You can still do what you love, be with your family, have a high quality of life, and not be as stressed and not be as tired, and a lot of
Right.
factors.
Right. Absolutely, Alex. Yeah.
And you mentioned you have your own band, Tristan Imboden Yacht Stars. How'd you put that together? I mean, you got a whole group of guys that have done numerous things across the music industry. How'd you get that together?
Well, it was actually my wife's idea. I've got, a lot of friends in the business, and Ringo's band um, actually has a lot of my friends playing with him, and one of which, Greg Bissonette, the great drummer um, from Michigan, right, from Detroit originally. Um, he's been with Ringo now, I forget how many years, but this was, God, 5, 6 years ago now, I guess. But we were planning on going to see Ringo and his All Stars, right? And we had tickets and everything, and because I know so many guys in the band too. Steve Lukather from Toto, I've done so many albums with, and played with him and Los Lobotomies, which was the offshoot of Toto, and yeah, and then Greg, and so many of the people in Ringo's band. So anyway, uh, that I couldn't wait to see him. I'd never seen Ringo's band live, and I'd always heard what a great show it was. But right before we left, we get a phone call from Greg, and he said, "Tris, I don't want to promise anything, but there's a good chance tonight you're going to be sitting in on, and we'll play double drums, and you'll play Ringo's drums. So, so give peace a chance, and with a little help from my friends, because we do them as a medley, and we do them in the encore, and we'll play those songs together." And I was like, "Whoa!" So, anyway, Mary drove us to the show because I had the headphones on watching YouTube, trying to get their arrangement down. And sure enough, I get called up and play with Ringo on Ringo's drums.
Wow. That's awesome.
I still have some of his sticks. And so
That's
anyway,
awesome.
on the way home, oh, well, I should predicate it with that year, that very year, I had gone back after leaving Chicago. I had called Kenny Loggins just to, talk, and I told him what had done, and he said, really? He said, well, man, would you want to do some shows with me? He said, I only do 20 shows a year, so you could have a life. And I said, sure. So I went back and played with Kenny for a year. And during that time, we did 2 nights at the Hollywood Bowl with Christopher Cross, Michael McDonald, and Kenny Loggins. And right during that time was kind of when yacht rock was just starting to bubble up. And so, okay, so I predicated it with that now. So on the way home from Ringo, uh, my wife says, with Ringo's concept of everybody in the band having had at least 3 hits with other artists, like there was Greg Raleigh from Santana, um, and Hamish Stewart from Average White Band, and Colin Hay from Men at Work, and Steve Lukather from Toto. So she said, with all the people and all the records you've done, and all the hits that you've been a part of, you could put something together like that, only in the kind of yacht rock genre. Because I had, worked with, numerous, people in that genre, Gary Wright and Michael McDonald and, Christopher and I mean, so many people. And the more I thought about it, I thought, that's a pretty good idea. So just for fun, I started making phone calls to ask some of my friends whether they'd be into doing it. And everybody said, wow, absolutely, I'm in. So anyway, yeah, we started putting the band together, had a few rehearsals, and then COVID hit, right? And so it just put a big hold on everything. But we kept it together by, having Zoom meetings and every Tuesday night. And and then once COVID, the all of that had run its course, we started rehearsing again and started doing some shows. And the response has been great. It's been really good. So and my criteria was that you had to have played with the artist whose song we're doing live, either live or in the studio, played that so on that very song, um, or all three, and so anyway, it casts this big net because we've all worked with everybody from Steely Dan, or Donald Fagen to Boss Skaggs to, I mean, on and on. The saxophonist and I, Michael Paulo, worked with Al Jarreau for many years, and I have Boss Skaggs' guitarist for years, and who also worked with Michael McDonald. And then a big coup. We got Kenny Loggins as keyboard player of 25 years as a part of the band now. So anyway, it's a really good band, and we really have a lot of fun when we do work. We just don't work that much because we're a bunch of we charge too much. Ha! Bunch of mercenaries here,
Nice to be able to do just, as many shows as you guys want, get together as a group, have some fun, make some memories, have a good time. I mean,
Yeah.
and play some good music, and that yacht rock genre, like you said, it's exploded. And my parents are always listening to yacht rock channel on Sirius XM or different
Right.
places. And I mean, it's all great stuff, good summer vibes, and
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, it's fun. We've got some shows coming up this spring and summer, and I'm
yeah.
looking forward to getting back into it. Yeah,
That's great. That's awesome.
yeah.
Well, why don't we end the episode on talking about one of your hobbies and surfing. You know, you're big into surfing. Do you still surf?
I do, even after, being a cancer survivor and that, I'm so grateful I'm able to because they actually had to remove 2/3 of my right lung. And so, my paddling isn't what it used to be. And it also has sort of affected the scale of the waves I will allow myself to go into now or
Yeah,
surf. Whereas living in Hawaii before, I was really kind of pushing my own limits anyway, before cancer. And I got to surf waves that in my wildest imaginings, I didn't think I'd ever get to. So, but anyway, yeah. So I longboard only now. I don't shortboard anymore. And I grew up surfing. My dad was a lifeguard who surfed, and and I always lived right by the beach in Southern California, and so anyway, yeah, it was just a natural thing to do. It's what all my friends did, and I loved it and still do. So I started surfing really, when I was really young, maybe 10. And it's been quite a while. I don't even want to tell you how old I am now. And there's been
yeah,
periods in my life where, I've surfed more than others. But I really got back into it in the 90s. That's when I really started getting crazy about it. And then during that period, I moved to Hawaii too. So in my off time from Chicago, I was surfing Hawaii as well, and it was great. That was about 7 years of being in Hawaii, and yeah, so my wife and we're in Las Vegas right now. And of course, I didn't bring my surfboards here, but I have an amazing collection of surfboards that I have. We have another home in Southern California and San Diego, area, and all my surfboards are there. So we divide our time between here and there, and I'm still surfing. Yeah,
yeah. That's awesome. That's
yeah.
not something that's real big here in Michigan. I do have to say that I have some friends that like when we were in college, because I'm near Lake Superior, so they would in like November when the storms would roll in and you get some big waves, they'd put on a wetsuit
I've
and
seen
they'd
that.
go to some beaches and they'd do some surfing, obviously different kind of surfing, but
Yeah.
yeah, they'd go hit the waves and it's 40 degrees and sideways rain, but they were out there in the wetsuit.
Oh man, that is way too cold for me. I can't take cold water, especially in my old age now.
Yeah,
But but man, I've seen video of guys surfing there in Lake Michigan. It blows my mind, man.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, it's and you like we're um right here in Lake Superior, so we get some
Oh,
really,
Lake
really
Superior. I'm sorry.
big.
Yeah.
Well, Lake Michigan probably too, um,
Yeah.
but we get
Yeah.
some really massive. When you get a big storm, some big, the gales of November, as Gordon Lightfoot sings in the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. I mean, he's not joking. They get pretty big. You get a big storm. Um,
Yes. I've
yeah,
heard
nothing
about
I've tried though.
I've heard about the Three Sisters, isn't it? The legendary Three Sisters are these waves that come out of nowhere that I believe are in Lake Superior.
Oh,
Maybe
I
it's
guess I, I
but
live here and I
anyway,
don't know what you're talking about. I'll have to look into that.
yeah, I think they're called the Three Sisters, and these freak waves that just appear
Yeah,
on occasion and take tankers out. I mean,
right. Yeah,
yes,
it's incredible when you look at the history of like the shipwrecks in all of the Great Lakes, not just Superior. You look at Michigan and Huron and all of them.
yeah,
There's so much history, but in Lake Superior especially, there's neat history and then there's probably so many that nobody knows about. Smaller boats that
right,
wrecked and I know there was so my family had property along Lake Superior. So I grew up on the water, and along the beach off this point, there was remnants of a shipwreck you could kayak to, boat, or
Mm.
sometimes I had an uncle with a jet ski, and if the water was right, you could float the jet ski right over the shipwreck. It was called the Panama, this old boat. I don't know the history, but
Oh,
if the water was right, you could glide right over the top of, and it didn't look much more than you could see the what was left of the wood, but it was still cool to just kind of float right over the top
oh
of this
man,
little
yeah.
shipwreck.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. I love that.
Yeah,
All that is so fascinating to me. All that
yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, some people go scuba diving, and obviously I know people go down south where it's a lot warmer, and they'll do some scuba diving in shipwrecks, and I think that'd be cool to try someday.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've done a little bit of that, but not shipwrecks yet. But
Yeah,
I've gone scuba diving and I love
yeah,
snorkeling, for sure. Yeah.
yeah. Awesome. Well, Tris, I appreciate you joining me on the podcast. Enjoyed talking about your career in music, and I love your display behind you. That's awesome.
Oh, geez. Well, thank you. These are, yeah, again, like I say, I've been so blessed. Uh, these ones are the platinum, and each one is 1 million copies sold. And then I've got another wall on the other side over here that are a bunch of gold ones that are 500,000, 500,000. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so, and then I've got some in the living room too. I, like I say, I'm just the luckiest guy I know.
Yeah.
I wish I had the money that all those, records generated or the artists themselves have, but nonetheless, I'm proud of them for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you hopping on here.
All right, man. Great talking with you, Alex.
Thanks for listening. Please stay tuned for more episodes soon.